So which starter is best suited for a competitive meta? This is the first competitive analysis video that I've done since actually playing in the format, which I am basing this off of Series 1 format. So if I had not have played the format before this, I would have had much different opinions about which of these are stronger. And also I will very likely butcher these names, but we're just going to roll with it anyway. Starting with typings, we have Grass Dark for Meowscarada, which initially does not seem like a very good typing. You do have 5 super effectives, which is not bad on the offensive side. Defensively, things are not super great. You do have a 4x from Bug, that's not really a big deal, no one uses Bug type moves, but you still have 6 other weaknesses, and you don't resist a whole bunch of typings compared to like some more defensive typings. So it's not a particularly defensive typing, and offensively, it's also not exactly the greatest. But this typing does have Prankster immunity in the form of dark typing, and powder immunity because of the grass typing, which is actually very useful to have and makes up for some of its other mediocre qualities. Now, the fire type starter is Fire Ghost, which has 6 super effectives. There's also a lot less things that resist Fire Ghost, making this a fairly consistent offensive typing. As long as you're not fighting a normal type with Flash Fire, you're pretty much set. Now, this is also weak to 5 typings, but has the dual immunity from Ghost, takes no damage from bug moves, and takes half damage from 6 typings. So if you count all of these, that's 9 resist/immunities for this typing. So defensively, it's actually pretty solid. You also have Fire's burn immunity to play with, which, as you're gonna see later, doesn't really matter for this particular mon. And the water type is Water Fighting, which has the largest super effective pool offensively of 7. And this typing only has 5 typings that are super effective on it, but it does not give you any immunities. You just have 7 resists, which is a fairly consistent typing. There's nothing particularly special about it though. Now in this game, you can access hidden abilities fairly easily just by getting an ability patch. So the hidden ability starters are actually legal in Season 1. So aside from the standard starter abilities that I'm sure everyone knows at this point, Meowscarada gets Protein, which has taken a considerable nerf in this game, because it only works once per switch in now, but it does give you the option to change your typing to the typing of a move that you use. Based on how I've seen this Pokemon played in the competitive format, I don't actually think Protein is that great of an ability to have. It just doesn't do anything really. I think the nerf to Protein really hurts its use case and doesn't really make it worth switching your typing away from Grass Dark, because everything can change their typing in this game with the terrestrialization gimmick, so this is nothing special now. Now for Skeledirge, we have Unaware, which ignores stat modifications of your opponents, which that is a great ability to have. Anything that's trying to stall you with buffing moves, this Pokemon will just straight up ignore. This will also ignore Swords Dance boost, Belly Drum boost, everything. It's such a great ability to have to shut down stat buffing gimmicks. And this basically is a wall to body press builds or anything. Though with Ghost typing, you're not going to get hit by body press anyway. And I do think Unaware is considerably better than Blaze for this particular Pokemon. Now for Quaquaval, I think that's how it's pronounced, we have Moxie, which will raise your attack when you get a knockout. And this is a fairly strong ability. We've seen Gyarados run this sometimes if they're trying to play as a sweeper, and this oftentimes can really get out of hand once a Pokemon with Moxie has speed control. So I think this is a good ability and is most likely going to be more useful than Torrent. Getting into stats, Meowscarada has a very strong physical attack stat, as well as a very high speed stat for a starter of 123. Now, the defensive stats are relatively mediocre, and you're probably not going to want to use this as a special attacker because the physical attack is around 30 points higher. So fast physical offense is essentially the only mode for this. Skeledirge has a much different spread with its stats. You have a reasonably high hit point and defense stat, the physical wall potential of this is actually quite high, and you still have a pretty good 110 special attack, and this is one of the slower starters that we've seen at 66 base speed. Now, the physical attack is actually really low for a starter as well, because typically the off stat of a starter is around 80 to 85. So this Pokemon actually has very optimal stats for a starter, and this can really play into its physical bulk quite well. And you could combine this with like an Assault Vest to cover the special defense not being quite as high as the physical defense. And you have something that is exceptionally bulky for a starter, much like Swampert. And the water starter has a very nice 120 physical attack, with very normal stats outside of that. We have 85 on 3 different stats, and you have slightly higher physical bulk than special bulk. So this stat spread is the least optimized of the 3, and on stats alone, I think this is the worst Pokemon of the 3. Because while the physical attack stat is quite high, that is not a great speed stat to work with. Considering how its signature move works, that speed stat is actually a little bit on the low side. I actually would have preferred this have slightly less bulk, just to have a little bit more speed. Getting into signature moves, we have Flower Trick, which is a 70 power physical attack that can never miss and always lands a critical hit. So this is effectively a 105 power move that cannot miss, as long as you're not attacking something that has shell armor. And this move is also going to ignore stat modifications because it always crits. So this can blow past a body press build, especially if it is weak to grass. This is a very strong, very consistent move that I think you would always run on this Pokemon. For the fire type, we have Torch Song, which is a special attack at 80 base power that is a guaranteed boost to the user's special attack stat. Now, this is a very strong move because combined with the high bulk stat of this Pokemon, you can just start setting up this thing's offense using Torch Song to eventually get to where you're starting to one-hit everything that you see. Combine that with Unaware so that you ignore special defense boost. This thing can steamroll very easily if you're not prepared to stop it very quickly. So you would always run Torch Song on this. It's a very strong move. And for the water starter, we have Aqua Step, which is an 80 power physical attack that is a guaranteed boost to the user's speed. So if you're using this move, you can kind of play this Pokemon in a similar fashion to Blaziken, because you can be buffing the speed stat every turn, except now you have Moxie to get a boost on your attack stat if you ever get a knockout, which could make this quite a strong Pokemon if you can get a few speed boosts into it and are able to take a knockout with it as well. You could probably just spam this one move, and that be the only move you use for this Pokemon. If we look at the rest of Meowscarada's moveset, we do have several good Dark-type moves such as Knock Off and Night Slash. You have a little bit of coverage in the form of Play Rough. You're never going to use another grass move than Flower Trick, so you can just ignore every grass move you see. This does also get some interesting supportive moves such as Charm and Fake Tears, so you could use its very high speed stat and run it as a support as well. A lot of Pokemon in this game get Chilling Water, and I really have no idea why. It's a very strange move to just give to basically everything. Don't run that on this. You do get Brick Break for screens, U-Turn to switch it out. Stab Foul Play is always nice. It gets multiple of the arena traps, not really sure why, but okay. Also, having access to Taunt is never a bad thing. Skill Swap could be quite interesting with Protein if you can give that to a Pokemon that could really benefit from having its typing changed without you wanting to use the Terastallized gimmick. That might be something I'll play into in a future team. Fast Trick is never really a bad thing, though it's not the greatest thing in this meta currently. Pollen Puff, more supportive options. This does get Trick Room, which is quite odd considering its high speed stat, though it would be quite a surprising Trick Room to see. Also, this does get Leech Seed, Sucker Punch, and Ally Switch, so this has a very good supportive moveset with a typing that's immune to a lot of supportive stuff. I would not be surprised if this Pokemon turns into a support in later formats. For the fire type, you do get the good fire moves like Flamethrower, Will-O-Wisp, Fire Blast, Overheat. You would probably not use any of those over Torch Song though, just because of how strong that is. Now, interestingly enough, this does get access to Snarl, which I do find kind of strange, but Snarl is a very good move. But you probably would not want to use this if you're running it unaware. And Shadow Ball is probably your best ghost type move for this. Although you could always go for the Will-O-Wisp Hex idea, which is typically less consistent than just clicking Shadow Ball. Hyper Voice because it's a singer, that's funny. Now this is able to speed control with Scary Face. It also gets several Fangs, which you're probably not going to run Fangs on this, considering its low physical attack. It gets a lot of physical moves, which I think is kind of funny, and you would never use any of these moves most of the time. Imprison may be a good option to consider in the future, though I don't think in the current format that's really going to be the best play. I think this would also be a good mon to use Substitute with, because you could really start setting it up behind a sub. Heat Wave, a good spread move if you need that. Earth Power for coverage, that's not bad. Solar Beam if you have it in a Sun team, also not a bad option. It does get Slack Off as an egg move, so you can actually heal this and just make it a tanky stall build. And apparently the pre-Evo gets Yawn, but the max Evo does not. That's very interesting. This does not have the same flexibility with its moveset as Masquerada does, but this can play a bulky stall build very well, and it has an excellent signature move that it can use to start buffing its special attack to just make it almost unstoppable. So I think if you could ever get this thing set up, it would be very strong and very hard to break. But Prankster Haze is in this game, so there are counters. Now for the water type, we have Aqua Jet, so if you want a priority move, though if you do get several speed boosts from Aqua Step, you may not actually need to run Aqua Jet. You also do get access to Wave Crash, which is a very strong move, and is essentially Flare Blitz but a water type move. That's always a good option to have around, and it might be better to run that over Aqua Jet. This gets Air Slash, which I do find quite strange, but it is a bird, so. Close Combat is your fighting move, probably the only fighting move you're going to use on this, which is never a bad option to run Close Combat. Feather Dance is interesting, so you can actually use this to lower attack stat, which I find kind of odd, though I do think this would be better suited as an offensive threat rather than a supportive threat. But maybe it actually has a moveset that benefits playing support. You do get some interesting options like Low Kick, Icy Wind if you want to speed control, Stab, Brick Break, that's nice, U-Turn, Bulk Up if you want to try to set this thing up. It does get Taunt and Swords Dance, that's nice. Ice Spinner, so this can actually get rid of terrain using Ice Spinner. You'd probably run this as a coverage move, and that would be your only coverage move. Now this is a really interesting move that it gets Misty Terrain. That might actually be something to consider. Also, Baton Pass is pretty good on this mon, if you can ever get the boost up on it. Brave Bird, that's a decent move. Now this does get Detect and Roost. I don't actually know how useful Roost is on this, just because it doesn't have the greatest bulk out there. You would probably just get one hit by a strong electric move from, say, Rotom. Anyway, I don't think this is very helpful. And this does get Counter, that's fun. Focus Sash Counter is always an option. So I think Quaquaval is the worst of the three. Initially, I thought it was going to be like a better version of Blaziken, but it is so reliant on having to set up using moves, versus Blaziken just gets that speed boost by staying on the field every turn. So I actually think this is a worse form of Blaziken, and this is also vulnerable to Will-O-Wisp because it's not a fire type. While I do think you could find a good use case for this, the current format does not help this thing at all. I haven't even seen this in a competitive team on the ladder, and I think there's good reason for it. It just doesn't have a place in the meta right now. Although possibly with a meta that has the legendary quartet, this might be quite strong, because you could use this as a counter to the fire type Goldfish. But currently it is not ideal to use this starter in the current competitive format. The second strongest, I would say, is Skeledirge. It has a great ability, it has a pretty decent typing, it has a great signature move, and a stat pool that allows it to set up very well as a physical wall that can gradually buff its stats to just slowly wear its opponents out. This also being immune to extreme speed is oddly good considering how popular extreme speed Dragonite is right now. So I think if you put this next to Grimmsnarl and start setting up screens and run Slack off on this, you could make this very difficult to get through. And you could run this Fairy Terra type if you wanted to deal with Dondozo, so that you are immune to its signature move and you can slowly wear it down with your signature move, while also ignoring all of Dondozo's stat buffs. So I do think this has a fairly decent place in the meta already, and if I were to rank it on like a tier list, it would be like high B or low A tier. It's quite strong. It does take a little bit of setup, which sometimes you're not really able to get that off, but it is otherwise very good. Now, currently I think Meowscarada is the best in the format as far as the starters go. Being immune to powder moves means you don't get hit by Spore or Rage Powder, which I know for a while Amoonguss was pretty much on every team, so that's quite nice to have. But also that Prankster immunity is very solid. It's just good to have a dark type in general right now with how the format is. And its signature move is very consistent. So you can use this to counter Dondozo as well, just ignoring its defensive boost and smacking it with Flower Trick. This also has a very good speed stat for the format, and it has a lot more options in terms of moveset that it can work with. You can make this a support and it would actually be quite good at it. This is also the most common, as I haven't even run into the other two in a competitive match yet, but I have run into several of these. So yeah, currently this is the best of the three. But you know, that's gonna be it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see y'all next time.